We're continuing our sermon series, Gifts of the Season, on this third Sunday of Advent. Today we're looking at gifts that are unseen, or gifts that are unexpected, gifts that are hard to see at first. We're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 through 11. I invite you, as you're able, to please stand. Let us honor the reading of the gospel. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, and I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. I want to take just a couple of minutes this morning and have you ponder a question. I'm going to give you the question, and if you'll turn to maybe just a few people around you. If you don't know the person around you, please take a moment to introduce yourselves. What I want you to do is ponder this deep theological question. What is your favorite Christmas food? What is it that you have to make every year? Maybe it's from a recipe that your mom or your grandparents handed down to you. What is it that once you make it, you know Christmas has arrived? So take 90 seconds and go. Okay, let's come back together. All right, am I on? Let's come back together and see, have you all share, what is your favorite Christmas food, or your favorite food this time of year? All of it, okay. Turkey.
My dad's chocolate peanut butter fudge.
Your dad's chocolate peanut butter fudge. Breakfast? Yes.
Mama Rail's fruitcake.
Your Mama's Rail's fruitcake, okay.
Rice meatballs.
Rice meatballs, okay. All right, any others?
My mother's cranberry ice.
Your mother's cranberry ice.
My mother's cheese straws.
Cheese straws, okay.
Fruit salad.
Fruit salad, yeah. What's that? Oyster casserole.
Oh, yum.
Now we're getting into some dangerous territory. Yes. Banana pineapple Christmas candle. Okay. With a cherry on top. Okay. Nice. All right. So lots of different variety of things that get us into the Christmas spirit. Now, can y'all hear me? Is my microphone on? Okay. Just want to make sure. This has absolutely nothing to do with our gospel lesson. Just wanted to take a little time just to share a little bit, get to know each other. We're going to talk about unseen gifts or unexpected gifts this morning. One pastor tells of getting a phone call from one of his parishioners. It was a woman who was in distress, and she said, "Pastor, I really believe my house is haunted. Could you come over and do some sort of exorcism?" And this is the first kind of request that this pastor had gotten, and so he told the woman he wanted to do some research and maybe get back to her in a couple of days. And so a couple of days later, he called. They made arrangements for him to come over and visit. And they sat together on her sofa, and he explained how Jesus, in his death and resurrection, has overcome the power of evil and darkness, and that we embody this when we live into our discipleship, when we live out our baptism. But that doesn't always mean that we won't be afraid of something. And so he invited her to join him as they walked through the rooms of the house, and he said a brief prayer, and he splashed some holy water. He brought a vial of holy water with him. And so they did that. And it took about 10 minutes for them to go through the entire house, just praying and just kind of splashing a little bit of holy water. And they got back together in the living room. They sat on the couch, and as they were sitting down, he noticed a look of disappointment on her face. And she said to him, "Is that it? Is that all?" And the pastor said, "Yes, that's it." And she said, "Well, I could have done that." She was expecting something dramatic and spectacular, like a scene from The Exorcist or Ghostbusters or something. But instead of flashes of lightning and maybe demonic voices or some sort of cosmic battle taking place in her kitchen, instead she just got a few splashes of water and some prayer. That was it. She seemed to be disappointed that there wasn't more to it than that. What a difference a week makes. Last week, we were in the 3rd chapter of Matthew's Gospel, where we heard John the Baptist preaching fire and brimstone while standing in the muddy Jordan River out in the wilderness. And today, just 8 chapters and probably a few months later, we find John the Baptist in prison, taken into custody by King Herod, because John's preaching was too political. John had probably been told, don't bring any politics into the pulpit, just preach spiritual things, stay in your lane. Well, apparently John did not get that memo. John preached against Herod's adulterous marriage, and so Herod has him arrested. Last week, John was boldly declaring that Messiah was coming and the people had better get ready or else. For Messiah was bringing fire and an axe and justice with him. And when he came, there was going to be hell to pay for those who did not repent and turn their lives around. Like Jesus, John's favorite prophet was Isaiah. And in our first lesson, we read about Isaiah's vision of a renewed world. And in a beautiful word picture, kind of a metaphor, the prophet sees a time in which God would restore not just God's people, but would restore the entire creation. Isaiah envisioned a new world when Messiah came, a world where rivers flowed in deserts, where wolves and lambs play together, where calves feel comfortable in the presence of lions. I love how Isaiah says that the Lord will come with vengeance. And then he goes on to describe what the Lord will do. He will open the eyes of the blind. He will heal the deaf. He will restore. Last week, John spoke boldly, confidently of the one who is coming. In fact, who is just around the corner, whose sandals he was not worthy to even carry. It seems that the title of Messiah seems to have been placed upon his cousin Jesus. It seems that Jesus would be the one who would make Israel great again, overthrow the Romans, destroy the wicked, cure all sickness and disease, and restore creation to its proper intention. When John baptized Jesus, we might assume he was expecting great things to immediately happen, that the world would change. He was certain of it. But after the baptism, the desert did not begin to bloom. It was still just as dry as ever. And people still got sick and died. Rome was still in charge and enforced its will with great brutality. And wolves looked at lambs not as friends, but as dinner. John had gotten word of a few things that Jesus had been doing, a few healings, but so far no fire was being thrown, no axe was being swung, no chaff was being burned. Maybe Jesus was just taking his time and maybe doing things backwards, doing things in reverse. Maybe the healings would come first before we get to the vengeance part. Maybe the settling of the scores will come later. Whatever he was doing, it was just hard to see at first. Today we find John in prison. He has gone from the wide open spaces of the wilderness to the close confinement of a prison cell. His voice now silenced. His sermons no longer ringing out in the wilderness. Imagine his disappointment in the way things have turned out. His cousin did not seem to be fulfilling his Christmas wish list, a list that included fiery punishment for the wicked and the unrepentant being cut down. It's interesting that in verse 2 we read, "Now when John had heard what the Messiah was doing." This is the first time that Matthew, as the narrator, refers to Jesus as the Messiah or the Christ. The only other time, the first time that the gospel gives us this title or equates Jesus with the Messiah is in chapter 2, when the wise men sent Herod to consult with his scribes to see where the Christ was to be born. John has been hearing what the Messiah has been doing, and to put it bluntly, he wasn't that impressed. It was kind of like getting, to the end of all of your Christmas gifts on Christmas morning, and the very last gift you open is socks and underwear. I mean, it's a nice thought, it's a nice gesture, but isn't there more? Is that all? If Jesus is God's anointed, God's Messiah, God's gift to the world, then it wasn't immediately apparent. If Jesus was God's gift to the world, then John was having a hard time seeing this gift, at least at first. Jesus did not bring the axe. He did not ask to speak to Caesar or give a speech to Parliament or Congress. Jesus did not gather the troops for the revolution. No, when Jesus, the would-be Messiah, came onto the scene, he went to dinner parties, and he told a lot of stories, and he preached. And occasionally he would do a healing or do some sort of miracle that would really put his name out there. But there are plenty of other persons before him and after him who were credited with doing some kind of miraculous deed. At first glance, John's cousin seemed to be kind of a disappointing Messiah. He was not the bright lights, fire and brimstone Christmas Messiah John had been preaching about, that John had been expecting. He was turning out to be a socks and underwear kind of Messiah. I remember years ago, Heidi and I were in a restaurant, and we saw a waitress walk by, and she had a tray, and on this tray was this large mason jar that was filled with banana pudding, and it was just overflowing with whipped cream and a cherry on top, and it had vanilla wafers crumbled on top, and there were 2 large spoons coming out of it. And we asked our waitress about it, and she said, "Oh, that's our specialty. Everybody comes for our banana pudding." And so, of course, we ordered one. We didn't want to be rude. And the waitress brought it out. She put it on our table, and we each took a heaping spoonful of banana pudding, making sure to get that right ratio of bananas and pudding and whipped cream and vanilla wafers. And we tried it, and it was awful. It was the most disappointing dessert we had ever tasted. The bananas weren't even right. They were still hard. The pudding was just flavorless. It was the most disappointing dessert we'd ever experienced. We were expecting to be wowed by something that apparently a lot of people were drawn to, but at the end we were left asking, is that it? That's what people come from all over? Is that all? Are you the one that we've been waiting for, or should we be waiting for another? That was John's question to two of his own disciples. He wanted them to send this question, send word to Jesus. In other words, John is saying he's been hearing what Jesus has been doing, and in response he's asking, is that all? Is that it? In light of what John had been preaching, in light of what Isaiah had been envisioning, Jesus just didn't seem to be delivering the goods at first. Before Jesus began his ministry, John spoke with unwavering confidence about the one who was to come. But now, in the middle of Jesus' ministry, John seems to be doubting. John doesn't seem to be quite so certain. Which brings to mind the question, what do you do when it appears that God isn't delivering the goods, at least not like you expected? What do you do when God doesn't answer your prayer the way you wanted it answered? What do we do when we sometimes can't see God at work? I think John's question gives voice to the disappointment that we all can feel sometimes when we experience life and the disappointments that sometimes come with life. We know that there's more, there has to be more. We know that the present circumstances, the present situation is not how things ought to be. Jesus sends word back to John. He tells the two disciples, go and tell John what you have seen and what you have heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Notice that Jesus did not say, all of the blind see, all of the deaf now hear, all of the dead are now raised. Many people received healing or feeding at the hands of Jesus, but not all. It's as if Jesus is presenting John with just a few signs, a few glimpses of hope, a little bit of light shining in a world that is vastly dark. Just a little bit of hope to keep us hopeful. In response to John's question, are you the one that we've been waiting for, or should we wait for another? Jesus never answers the question, which is typical of Jesus. Instead, he sends John's disciples back to him, saying, go and tell John what you have seen and what you have heard. In other words, who Jesus is and what he is doing, what Jesus is up to, cannot be summed up in a slogan or put on a bumper sticker. It cannot be given as a simple yes or no. If people want to know Jesus, then the people who know Jesus are going to have to tell what they have seen and what they have heard. Advent calls us to lean into the promises of God, even when those promises seem beyond our grasp, even when those promises can't be quite seen yet, or at least seen in their fullness. We only get a glimpse. We long for that day when swords will be beaten into plowshares, when cancer wards will be empty, when funeral homes will go out of business, when there will be no more need for hunger relief agencies. For the day will come when the earth will be filled with God's justice and God's peace, and hunger and death and disease and dying will be no more. But until that day arrives, we will take the smallest gifts, the gifts that seem at first glance to be insignificant, the gifts we didn't expect, the gifts we didn't ask for. will take these seemingly insignificant gifts as signs of hope. Because often, the gifts we didn't want or didn't ask for, the gifts that we often tend to overlook, turn out to be the gifts that we need. Thanks be to God for God's good news to us today. Amen.